Thank you. Welcome everybody to this scripting problem of the month. Third one in this series. We set up this series to have a few short academies where we talk about some common problems that we see in the help desk, and this time we will talk about restarting interviews. There's a lot to say about restarting interviews, a lot in detail. I will point you later where you can find the detailed descriptions if you are curious for that. In this academy, we will concentrate on the three most often problems we see in the help desk, and that has to do with I don't want people to be able to restart an interview at all. That is the first one. The second one is I want to limit how many times people can restart an interview, or at least I want to limit the time frame in which people can restart an interview. And the third problem we see quite often is I want people not to restart the survey at the point where the survey was interrupted. We will take a look at those three and no more, because that is about all we have time for in half an hour. So, but that said, let's take a look at what we precisely will do. I will take a very short look at the survey types or the interview types that you can suspend or can interrupt. Then we'll very shortly talk about how you can pause an interview, what happens when you restart an interview, and then finally we will have a demo about three examples, three issues I just talked about. We'll all very shortly talk about open interviews, how you should control the starts of open interviews, and we'll end with a short description of what the maximum idle time is. How long can an interview, how long can someone sit behind his browser, give no answer, and that is still considered an active interview. Finally, as always, we'll start with questions. So, but that about. As I said, there is a lot more detail to be shared about those restart. If you are curious about more details, we have two academies, one for the online restarts and pause, that is Academy 30, and one for KP restarts, and that is called Surveys in Waves, and that is Academy 16. Both of them are over an hour. So as I said, there is a lot more to tell about restarts than we have time for in this half an hour. But this is where you can find more information. So the survey or interview types that you can restart if they are interrupted. For online, those are interviews with respondent key. If there is no respondent key, you cannot restart that interview. And for KP, that are surveys with sample points and addresses. The common thing between those two types is you need some sort of ID where you can actually ID that interview. And once restarted, you can find that interview back. And for online, that is the respondent key. For KP, that is the address. One thing to be mindful of, if you want to restart a KP interview can only be restarted on the same device by the same interviewer as long as the survey is not stopped. Said more details about that in the actual Academy of KP, but that is something to keep very good in mind if you want to restart a KP interview. So, how to pause or interrupt an interview? There are four ways. You can script it. That is simply you route someone to the end st29 command, and that will interrupt that interview. And if this is an interview with a respondent key or in KP an interview with an address, it means it can be restarted. Other way for online or indeed also KP is that the respondent or interviewer presses the pause button. If you look in the manager, you will find an option there that says hide pause button. Actually, activating that option removes the pause button. It does not remove the capability of pausing that interview. If the respondent does one of the two things, later things, the respondent simply closes the browser, he can still restart that interview if that is an interview with a respondent key, or if the respondent is timed out, if the respondent simply gives no answer for a long time, he is timed out, and also at that point that interview can be restarted if this is an interview with a respondent key. So keep in mind, removing the pause button does not remove the capability of restarting an interview, but only removes the pause button. So what happens when an interview is restarted? Well, the short answer is the interview is continued at the point where it was interrupted. So if you if the browser is closed at question 50, and this interview is resumed, that interview will resume at question 50, and all previous answers will be restored. This is the short answer. It is a bit more complicated what happens technically, and we need to take a look at what happens technically in order to understand how you could control what happens during that restart. For that, we first need, for that more detailed look of what happens, we'll first take a look at what happens when you start an interview. Well, when you start an interview, the Odin script starts running, and the Odin script starts running until it meets a point where input is required from the respondent. That usually is the first question. That question then is answered, data is stored in the database, and the script is run again until again input is required from the respondent, etc., until you actually end the survey or until that survey is paused. So that is how an interview is started, and that is how an interview runs if you do not pause an interview. If you pause an interview, what happens then if you restart an interview? Well, that is the next slide. What happens then is that we start again running the Odin script, and this time we are looking in the database and see if there is an answer. If there is an answer to a question, we simply skip to the next question and the next question and the next question until actually input is required from the respondent. Then the page is rendered and everything runs as in the previous page from that point onwards. So that usually means, as I said, if you pause at question 50, the database will restore the entire interview until question 50, and from that point onwards, the script will run again. Restoring the interview means that the interview is restored in exactly the state as it was before the pause was made. So if you have things in there like a date command, that date command will still show the date as it was when it was first run. So when it was started the first time, it will not have the date of the restart. Only exception is the stratification command. The stratification command is always checked against the current stratification, even against the current quota fulfillments, even if it is running in what we call the suspend image, and this is what we call the suspend image. So this is what happens. Now, how can you control what happens in that suspend image, in that restart? Well, therefore, we have introduced something that we call an init block. Init block is a set of commands that you start with star init and you end it. And everything between that star init and the star end is considered part of the init block, and that has a special status in Odin. What happens in a survey with an init block? If this is the first start of a survey, what first is done, the init block is run, and then the rest of the Odin script is run. So it doesn't matter where you place your init block in your script, your init block at the start, as the first start of the interview, is always run first. What happens if we restart an interview with an init block? That is where the magic happens. We first again run the suspend image without the init block, and then when that suspend image is run, then the init block is run. So at that point we can start checking things and checking things, what happened in that suspend image. And based on that, we can decide to either restart the interview or pause that interview or continue. So sounds a bit abstract, so let's go to the demos and it will probably be more clear. So the demos, as said, will be about I want to be able to not restart an interview at all, even if the survey type or the interview type that I use allows a restart. I do not want to restart an interview. Second demo will be about only restart this interview after X time, and then finally restart at another point. So let's go to the demos. Let's go to the browser. Okay, sign in again. Fine. Oh, okay. Good. I remember my password. Now let's go to the list of surveys. Only the favorite ones, because that's the one I prepared for this academy. So first, no restart. Let's actually see what happens if we run that survey. So very quickly, and then we take a look at the script. So I copy the live link. I start the survey. This needs a respondent key. I will use W1, Wednesday 1, because I know I haven't used that one. Copy and paste that, and then start it. So first question, we go to the second question. And at this point, we simply pause the survey. And as said, this survey has an init block that does not allow you to restart this, even if we are using a respondent key like here. So let's start that, and indeed it immediately says it's not allowed to restart this interview once paused. This interview will now be terminated, and if I click next, this will be a completed interview. Now, what happens in this survey? Let's take a look at this survey. This is the only start once script. So simply we have here the
Frank.
Yeah.
Can you increase the font?
Yeah, I will increase the font. I was just thinking about that. Not this one. Settings, font, choose font, 19. So now we can have all see. So this is the question. It's simply question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not very interesting. This is the init block. That is what happens. So we start the init block and we end the init block. Very important that you end the init block, because otherwise your entire survey becomes an init block. So, and simply I have one question here, which is on the filter if the survey has started. And if that is the case, this text is shown, as you can show, and then we have the same filter, and under that filter we actually end this interview as a screened out. The flag survey has started is set as the first thing when we actually start the survey. So init first, and then immediately we set the flag survey has started. So after the first start, this flag is put to 1, and from that we pick that up in the init block, and in the init block we say, no, you cannot restart the survey, and we end it. So this is how you stop a survey restarting. Next question is, of course, what if I want to restart a survey only 2 or 3 times? That is way more difficult, and that actually requires calling out to an external database, which is a topic that we will discuss in a academy either end of November or early December. So I will not get into that now, because that requires connecting to an external database, and we'll talk about that in about a month. So let's go to the next problem. And the next problem was, I want to restart an interview, but I have time frames. I have time constraints on that. I only want you to restart an interview a day after you made the pause, or I only want you to restart an interview within a day that the pause is made. That's all the same thing. It's just different filters. So I prepared one. And let's go to the list of surveys again, and that is restart after a minute, and that exactly does what it says. That only allows you to restart the interview if at least a minute has passed. So again, let's see what happens. Let's copy the live link. Let's use the same respondent key. This is a different survey, so I can use the same respondent key. Copy this, so we're sure we're starting the same survey. So this is the first question, and I immediately say pause the survey. So I will pause the survey here. We have paused the survey, and then let's restart the same survey. And I have lost my respondent key, I see. So, and now it says you can only restart this interview after 1 minute and only 18 seconds since the start of this interview. So you need to wait another 42 seconds. If I click next, I'm routed to not a screen out, but this time a pause of an interview. If I restart the interview again, it will now say only 44 seconds have passed, so we need to wait another 60 seconds. Next, we'll again pause this interview, and let's see if 60 seconds have passed. Oops. I messed up the respondent key, so let's do this again. W1. And now, as you can see, a minute has passed and we are allowed to continue. And it restarted, and you see the question that where the pause was made. So it now says pause survey, which is a bit awkward, of course, because we don't want to pause the survey. We actually want to continue on the next question, which is what we will take a look at the next problem we'll take a look at. Let's first take a look at this particular script, how this is scripted. So for that, let's open survey again. And this is restart after a minute queue. So what happens here? I start survey and I immediately put the date. As I said, the init block does not need to be the first thing. It does not need to be the first thing in your survey. It can be anywhere in your survey. And Odin will take care that it is run at the correct point. So I start with actually getting the date. So this is the date of the start of the survey, the first start of the survey. And I immediately recalculate this into seconds. So I know the number of seconds. Then in the init block, I also put the date, and this will then get the date of the restart. I calculate that into seconds, and I simply compare if there are more than 60 seconds difference between there. If there's not, I display this question, display this text, including saying how many seconds there are already passed, and then I pause the survey. So enter state 29. And if 60 seconds are passed, this is all fine, and we continue with the next question. So this is how this is done. Now, as we already said, if you then restart this interview, you immediately end on question 1, where it says that you should pause the interview. That is probably not what you want here. This time, it's all depending on what the respondent does, but especially when you do a scripted pause, this you need to do something here, because otherwise it will keep on running your scripted pause. Let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at scripted pause. I have one already ready here, which is scripted pause version 1. So in this script, I have a first question, a second question, and in that second question, it actually says that this question will be paused after this question. Let's actually remove this. And then it will actually pause this survey. So then we can say end as day 29, and then it will pause this survey. So let's save this. This is our scripted pause. Then let's go to the manager again. Let's end this survey. Go to our list only. So the scripted pause setup. Let's very quickly upload the script we just made, which is version 1. Save this one and publish it. I will talk about this shortly. Let's first publish it, and let's see what happens if I copy this live link to this survey. Again, different survey, so I can use the same respondent key, W1. Copy this. Start the survey. So first question, at the second question, this survey will be paused. If I click next, this survey is paused. Now what happens if I restart this interview? It is restarted at the question where it says it should be paused, and if I click next, the survey is paused. But this is of course not what we want. So to prevent this, let's again take a look at the survey. I already have prepared a little bit here. I created a var which is called init has run. We will be using this var in the init log. So let's create an init log. Init, and all we do in that init log is set the set this var. So we set this var init has run. Copy that one. We set this one. Okay. Now let's keep this one. So let's actually say init has run. Init has run. We put that to 1. And then we end the init block. That is all we do. So when the init has run, this var actually has the value of 1. And that means that we can say on this particular question that you should only run this if the init has run is 1. Well, what does that mean? Init has run. Has run is 1. What does this mean in the normal interview? So when you actually are presenting this to a respondent, this will always be 1. So the respondent will see this question. But if this is running as part of a suspend image in the restart, the init will not be 1, and this question will actually be skipped. So the same we do here then, because we also do not want this to be executed as part of the suspend. So init has run is 1. And then we also skip the pause question. Let's check this very quickly to see if I did not make any spelling mistakes. I didn't, I think. So we can save this one. go back to the survey, upload our new version, which is scripted pause v1, save this one and publish. And this is the time where I talk shortly about this one. We have two options here, but these options are only relevant for running interviews. So if you choose the option must be upgraded to the latest version, all your running interviews, your currently running interviews, will also be upgraded to the latest version. But we do not have a running interview. That interview is already paused, and there is no choice for paused interviews. Every restarted interview will be restarted on the new version. So I can simply accept this as it is. Click OK, and let's then resume this survey. And now it resumes at the third question. It has skipped all the previous questions. One thing, word of warning here. We are actually skipping this question in the restart, which also means that the data will not be in the database once this interview is restarted. So only do this on questions where you do not need the data. Yeah, so that's how to restart at a different point. So let's go back to the presentation and let's continue. So one small word about open surveys. If you run open surveys, so surveys without a respondent key, that is a reverse sampling, and you run this on a website or social media, chances are that you will get an awful lot of bots in your that will start the survey. Bots are not real interviews. There are just programs that are crawling around the internet, and they simply start links. This causes a lot of unwanted starts in interviews. We have seen surveys where there were up to hundreds of thousands of starts for just a couple of hundred real interviews. And all those other hundreds of thousands of starts were bots. At this point, we say, if you run reverse sampling, if you put an open link on a website or social media, we want you to take precautions to keep the bots out. If you have no idea how to do that, get in contact with your help desk and we can help you do that. We can place a landing page before this. So that first is a landing page where all the bots then end, and then only the interview is started. As said, we can help you with that. So contact the help desk if you want to run an open survey on a website or a social media and you have no idea how to keep the bots out. Last thing, the maximum idle time. Maximum idle time, that is the maximum time someone can not give an answer to an interview and it is still considered an active interview. The maximum idle time is 15. This is relevant for restarts because if this is an open survey and the maximum idle time is passed and someone tries to continue that interview, will be said that this interview is over, that this interview is completed. If it has a respondent key, that interview will be restarted, the suspend image will be played, and then the interview will continue. So this is the maximum idle time. You can see that this happened. It's the last thing that I wanted to show you. If you look at the audit log, and I have prepared one audit log, which is a audit log from a survey with only 2 interviews. The first interview, I actually closed the browser. The second interview, I did not close the browser. I simply waited half an hour. And you see, technical, there is no difference. They are both timed out after 15 minutes. Because technically there is no difference. We do not have a heartbeat to that interview. So we only know that this interview is no longer active. If we assume it's no longer active if we haven't heard from it for 50 minutes. Currently, there is one minor bug. If you keep this interview open in the same tab and you then continue it, you can continue that interview even after 15 minutes. That is not supposed to happen. That is a bug, and we will fix that. But that is currently, if you start testing this and you see this, yeah, now this is what happens. So last slide is any questions?
Yes, Frank, there is a question. When you showed in the manager the option to force an interviewer to use the latest version of the survey,
yeah.
If you make changes to the script, will the option make them start the interview from the beginning? And this is in the case when a new question has been added before the point where the interviewer paused the survey.
Yeah, as said, remember, the short answer, the interview is continued at the point where it was interrupted. The longer answer, the interview is restarted at the point where input is required from the respondent. So if you add a question, and that is a mandatory question, and that question, and you put that question before the point where that interview was paused, yeah, that interview will continue at that question, because that is the first question it meets where it needs an answer, and it doesn't have an answer to that question. So it will stop at that question. This is not only true for questions, this is also true if you change filter commands on questions, and in the restart, that filter is now all of a sudden true, and it wasn't true at the first time he went over, because again, then that question is shown. It doesn't have an answer to that question, and then that is where it stops. To finally give a complete answer, that also means that if you add codes to a question, if that is all you do, that does not force a restart at the question where you added those codes, because it is still a valid answer to that question. You just have added new codes to that question, but that is still a valid answer. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, a follow-up question to that question is, and the question after that will still hold their answers, or will the interviewer need to re-answer them? So if you have inserted the question,
you will need to re-enter that question. From that point, it will be a fresh interview. It might be that your browser shows already the answer to that question, but that is the browser cache. That is not the interview.
Yeah, that's clear, Frank. Those are all the questions.
Okay. Then final remarks. As always, recordings will be available later this week. If you have any suggestions for a topic, please write to your help desk. This was actually one of the suggestions we picked up from somebody asking to do an academy on this. Next Academy scripting problem of the month will be in November. Topic to be determined. And the next real Academy session, so that will be a longer one, will be late November, early December. I already said that will be about our new request commands that allows you to connect to an API. Okay, so if there are no further questions, then thank you for joining, and talk to you in about a month's time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.